Dear audience, dear guest, Mr. Michael Winterbottom, my name, well, first of all, welcome. Welcome to Lagerhuset and Göteborg International Film Festival and this masterclass. But it is not only a masterclass, it's also an award ceremony. Because for the 35th Göteborg International Film Festival, we decided to give our Honorary Dragon Award to the British director Michael Winterbottom. This award was handed out for the first time last year to American scriptwriter and director Charlie Kaufman. And it goes to somebody whose work we think is worth extra attention now and always. And as I'm sure you all know, Michael Winterbottom is a very productive director. And in that sense, he's a bit similar to our former honorary president, Ingmar Bergman. Just like Bergman, Michael Winterbottom makes one film a year, sometimes two. I'm not going to mention all the titles, and I'm sure you are quite familiar with many of them, but just to mention a few, we have watched with pleasure Welcome to Sarajevo, a 24-hour party people, In This World, 9 Songs, Tristram Shandy, a cock and bull story, and The Road to Guantanamo, A Mighty Heart, and just recently we watched The Trip as a TV. It ran as a TV series on Swedish television, and it's also a film that made it to the Swedish cinemas. And Michael Winterbottom's rich production to this date displays in itself the many different reasons for giving him this award. And some characteristics worth putting an extra emphasis on are, as I mentioned, his extraordinary and inspiring energy and creativity, his refined sense of humor, and his ability to bring out the best of his actors, no matter if they are professional or amateurs. And his ability also to find the human drama in global political issues and to make captivating films relating to these issues. And also the interesting and fruitful way in which Michael Winterbottom for many years has worked on the borders between documentary and fiction. So therefore, it's my great pleasure and honor to simply give you this Honorary Dragon Award 2012. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. It's a great honor to be following the footsteps of Charlie Kaufman. So thank you.
And we have about an hour now with Michael Winterbottom at your and my disposal for questions about things relating to this very extensive work. And we're going to do it like a ping-pong game. I ask some questions, and then I hope that many of you have questions to ask. So we will see how we will just follow the flow, go with the flow. And I'm thinking, just to start, if you don't want to say something, maybe you want to say something before we watch. I have 3 clips also that we have prepared.
I don't want to say anything, so that's good.
Okay, so we're going to see clips from In This World and from Tristram Shandy and from Trishna also. So we will take them in chronological order, and starting therefore with a clip from In This World from 2002, and they will run here on the screen. Maybe we can, I think, yeah. So let's just run the clip. So, maybe you could tell us a little bit about what we just saw and what comes to your mind now when you watch this. It's 10 years ago now that you made this film.
More, I think. No, 10 years, yeah. 10 years. That was a film called In This World. We started. To be honest, we were researching a story about refugees. It was a time in England when there'd been a lot of press criticism about people coming into Britain who were either refugees or economic migrants, and the idea was really either way around. The press didn't want them to come in there and kind of felt they were criminals. So we started looking at kind of stories about different, sort of. We went meeting people who kind of made various journeys. The biggest group at the time were Afghan refugees coming in mainly from Pakistan. So we decided we'd try and make a film about 2 refugees. That was before 9/11. Then 9/11 happened. So by the time we went to Peshawar in Pakistan, where there's 1 million Afghan refugees living, it was just after. That was October 2011. Me and Tony Grisoni, the writer, kind of went overland. So we went there and sort of met people at the refugee camp. And then we travelled overland back to Istanbul, and then from Istanbul back to Britain. And then we went out in February and found, in between that we sort of went out a few times and met and found the 2 actors there, Jamal and Inayatullah. They were living in the refugee camps in Peshawar are like integrated into the city, so they were both refugees, sort of not living actually in a physical camp, but living as refugees. They've been in camps and then got houses in the city, because the camps were quite open. And we then basically travelled overland, about a crew of about 7 or 8 people, and sort of did the overland journey, sort of took them from Peshawar across through Iran, through Turkey, by boat to Italy, into France and back to England, and kind of just really filmed the journey and sort of set up situations like that, and then they reacted. So in that particular case, we were travelling on a bus in Iran, and there was a checkpoint, and the guy, our Iranian fixer, was a little bit nervous about what the guys at the checkpoint might think about us. And because Inayatullah and Jamal were refugees, it was very, very hard to get paperwork to get them to cross borders, because the nature of being a refugee is you can't have any papers. If you have papers, you're not a refugee. So it was quite hard to get the paperwork to allow them to cross borders, and our paperwork was slightly dodgy. We'd already had to sort of had a bit of a problem getting out of Pakistan in the first place, and we're going to have problems later getting into Britain, out of Britain. But anyway, we were on the bus, and our Iranian fixer was rather worried, so he went ahead to the checkpoint, and that guy there on the bus was the guy who was running the checkpoint, and he said we could film the scene as long as he was the actor in the scene. So the condition of filming the scene was that he would be the guy checking the bus. So we said, okay, fine. So we arrived, and then he did all that, and Jamal and Inayatullah were just sort of answering as best they could the questions, because they could sort of understand, but sort of trying to pretend to be Iranians, but weren't sure. So I mean, and that was really typical of a lot of the scenes we did. We'd find someone on the journey who we thought was interesting, and then have a kind of basic situation, and then Jamal and Inayatullah would have to try and respond to that.
Okay. The floor is open. Some questions, maybe? No.
Good. Next clip.
No. But you said you said that this is what you remember from this film, the traveling. You traveled.
Yeah, the traveling. Obviously meeting up. First of all, kind of looking for Jamal and Inayatullah. But yeah, I mean, part of the starting point was wanting to do something about the incredible journeys people make and the kind of sacrifices they make to try and find a better life for themselves and their family. And, a lot of them are young males who are going in order to basically, hopefully, find work and then send money back. So, but that was part of the starting point. Part of the starting point was reaction to that in Britain. But I think also it was the idea of making a road movie. I mean, I think I'd just done a film called 25-Hour Party People, and we'd worked with a cameraman called Robbie Muller, who's a famous cameraman. And he'd wanted to use DV, so he'd used quite a bit of DV on that, sort of a large DV camera and a small one. And it seemed to me that, I'd done kind of little versions of road movies before, but it seemed that, when you're making a film with a big, even if you're a small crew, but with a big film camera, that it sort of feels like you have to sort of set up quite a lot of aspects of the story. And I kind of thought with a small camera, if we went on the whole journey with them, for a start we could film in places that we wouldn't otherwise be able to film. So because we looked like, our camera looked like a domestic camera, you could film in marketplaces in Peshawar or in the refugee camp in Peshawar. You could film in Iran and so on, in places where you wouldn't normally be able to go without a lot of permissions and so on. So you could just film wherever you wanted. And then also, it was a massive journey, so we could just shoot the whole journey and then afterwards try and work out what the story was. So it was a way of having a more unstructured and kind of looser kind of approach to making a road movie.
Yeah, a question. You will have a microphone, please.
Is it possible to have these lights a little less bright so it's possible to see the audience?
How would you say the process of doing that kind of improv filmmaking, how does that alter the entire process of bringing it from an idea to a finished product?
Well, it's totally different. I mean, in one way, it depends what area you're talking about. It makes it easier in lots of ways, because if you go to a financier with an idea, you sort of tell him the idea, and then he's got to say, or she's got to say yes or no. Whereas if you go with an idea for a script, you can spend 2 or 3 years working on the script before they have to say yes or no. And financiers love to spend time in development. Financiers love to have you under their thumb and under their control, so talking about details of script. So the great thing about improvised films is it's a much faster process about are you going to get financed or not. And then in the case of something like this, obviously it means it's more of a collaboration. We set up the basic story from research. We sort of decided on the route they were going to take and roughly what was going to happen, that one was going to get there and one wasn't. But then Jamal and Ayatollah created the characters. We spent a lot of time looking for them, but once we had them, they sort of were playing versions of themselves, so that it wasn't a question of us telling them how to behave or what to say or how they should relate to each other and so on. It was a question of observing that. I think you talked a little bit about sort of filming in between documentary and fiction. For me, it's not so much about whether it's documentary fiction in terms of is it based on a real story or not. But I like we try and sort of create sort of observational films where we create a situation, even if it's totally fictional situation, but create a situation and then try and observe how the people behave in that. And so something like this, where it's totally improvised, obviously. We're creating the basic situation, but then after that we're sort of just watching them, and they're creating the kind of the detail of the story, the texture of the story, the texture of the characters, the relationships. All that's provided by the people in it rather than by you. So it means there's less work for you to do as a director.
But in a way, it's sort of an inverted process in which you sort of create this idea of the film afterwards. But I mean, during this entire trip, you must have ended up with a lot of video. How was the cutting process? Yeah, I mean that's the. I'm sorry, I can't see where you are. So, oh, there you are. Okay. Yeah, that's the trade-off. It's kind of, in a way, it's quicker. It's quicker to get a decision from a financier, and in some ways, the preparation can be quicker because you don't have that script process, and then you make up all that time in the edit because you have to. As a director, you have to watch everything. You can't really hand it over to an editor, so you have to watch everything. You have a lot of material. You're spending a lot of time choosing what the story is, and obviously you have like a basic shape. So we knew basically what happened, but you're choosing. You're choosing between a lot of options in terms of scenes. So you might have 500 scenes, that become 100, and then you're choosing within that a lot of variations of dialogue. So you're having to do a lot more work and a lot more decision making at the editing stage. So you put the time in later.
Yeah, when you work on such a fast pace, when do you actually leave a project? I mean, like, when do you start thinking about the next one? Because when you push out that many films a year, you sort of have to probably, start thinking about the next one even before you finish the previous one.
Well, they overlap. So I don't think you don't stop working on a film until you actually kind of have to show it. So often, it's whatever screen you have, or whatever festival you're at. In my case, anyway, we're often editing. Right up to, we're fiddling right up to the day we show it, and we often have technical disasters because of that. But it's hard to leave it, and often after the first screening, you might carry on fiddling. So it depends on the sort of timing of how your post-productions work. Because obviously, a lot of times, if you're making independent films, people want you to get it to the first possible festival because that's when you can sell it, and that's when people can start to get their money back. So, in a way, you work right through to you don't give up on it until the very last minute when you hand it over. But obviously, you can overlap that with other things. For me, it's quite a relief. If you're working on one thing at one stage, you say you're in pre-production on one thing, it's nice to be in post-production on something else. It's nice to have different projects at different stages because there's a limit often to sort of how much you can do in kind of one burst. I think for some reason, I'm not sure why, it's like you may concentrate for 3 or 4 weeks on one project and then you need a rest from it and come back and look again at it. So if you're working on a script, you can't really just get from first draft to the final draft in a concentrated block. You need to have a sort of space and time to go away. And rather than go away and do nothing, it's quite nice to go away and do something kind of satisfying in a different stage on a different film.
Hello. I was like to ask about the observational style still. 9 Songs, a film you did some years later, it also have this observational style, but there are actors there compared to here where they're real people. How did the actors are real people too, but how did you feel about directing actors with this kind of style compared?
It's the same thing, you know. In a lot of the films I've done, there's been a mix of professional actors and non-professional actors. You know, so Trishna, the film we've just done is like a mixture of people like Frida Pinto and Riz Ahmed have done a lot of acting, and then almost most of the other people are just the kind of people who work in the hotel or live in the family where she was supposed to live, or dancers in the studio where she's supposed to be working. So I like the idea of taking actors and putting them into situations where other people are playing versions of themselves. I mean, in the case of 9 Songs, that came out of really of kind of frustration that you try and make things quite simple and natural and kind of truthful when you're filming, and then suddenly you get to a sex scene and it's completely different. You have lots of rules and everyone gets very self-conscious. It's very fake. So the idea was like to have no story, and we filmed that over quite a long period of time, so we could do a little bit of filming and stop. We'd go to a concert, and whenever a concert was on, every now and then we'd do a scene with them in bed. And the idea was to just to start with just 2 people in bed making love and see whether we could gradually piece together a story from that. So it was the same process. The fact that they're actors didn't really change the nature of the process. And obviously they bring different set of skills to it, so they may be thinking about the process in a different way. But from my point of view, it's like it's the same thing. You're trying to find something that seems truthful or interesting, kind of something that feels like it kind of reveals something about the characters. And that's the same whether it's someone who's professionally an actor or not.
And the actors still play characters or themselves?
Well, they play characters. I think whenever people improvise, the chances are they're more. People tend to kind of go. It's easier for someone to improvise if they're close to that character, I think. But I mean, it is different. So so in a film where if for me, if you're working with non-professional actors, then you have to find people who are right for that part, that role they're playing, and it's important you find people who are playing themselves. So Jamal and Ayatollah are not acting in that sense; they're responding to a situation. They're being themselves. They're not having to create a fictional character. So for me, when I work with people who aren't professional actors, I want them to be themselves, and I want to find the people who are right for that role in the film. I think with actors, it's slightly different. So people can obviously play further away from themselves. But for me, I always prefer it if it feels like people are being a version of themselves. So even if it's a fictional role, that you feel it's close to them and therefore truthful. And I think when people improvise, that tends to be more the case because they immediately draw on stuff that they kind of know instinctively rather than having stuff that they've constructed.
You've made a number of films touching on current, quite recent political issues like Welcome to Sarajevo and Road to Guantanamo, and this film and A Mighty Heart. How can you tell us a little bit of how important that is to you to make films about things that almost happen just now in global politics?
I think as a filmmaker, you're just trying to make a film about something that interests you. So whether it's a love story, a relationship, or whether it's something that's happening. Say Welcome to Sarajevo. It's a story that you're seeing on TV. For me, that was like I was sitting in England, having grown up at a time when you kind of thought there would never be a war in Europe, and then sitting there watching it on TV, and everyone just seemed, we all just seemed to be watching it on TV, and it seemed shocking that we weren't doing more, that this was happening sort of so close to home and nothing was happening about it. So it was a response to that. In a way, it's the same kind of process. I think it's something that you find however you come across a story or an idea, if it's something that interests you, you think you want to spend that time on it, then that's the starting point for the film. And then once you start making it, in the end, once you start making it, it becomes a story about this particular group of people in this particular situation, and whether it's based on real events or fictional, it's really the same process. You've got to try and find a way of understanding the way in which people behave in the context of the kind of world that they live in.
And is there something that interests you, extra much now, in global, what's happening in the world?
No, I'm not interested in the world anymore.
Okay, maybe we should watch. Or do we have an immediate question now? Or otherwise, maybe we could watch the clip from Tristram Shandy. Yeah. Okay.
A soldier, Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, maybe there's maybe a few words about the film Tristram Shandy first, and then maybe something about the collaboration that has continued between you and Robert Brydon and Steve Coogan.
Steve Coogan and Rob Brydon, I think, is the right order.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
he'd be very upset by that description. Well, yeah, it was. Tristram Shandy was a book that I really enjoyed as a teenager. It's a kind of it's an 18th century novel, kind of comic novel. And when we'd started work on 24-Hour Party People, which we made with Steve about 5 or 6 years before this, Frank Cottrell Boyce, the writer, and I talked a little bit about how Tristram Shandy was a kind of model for how Tony Wilson might tell his life, because in a way Tristram Shandy is about this guy trying to write down his life, and he goes on all these sort of diversions around, and it's sort of about the comedy of like not being able to stick to a story and tell a story as well as about family life and so on. So it was a little bit of a model for 24-Hour Party People. And after 24-Hour Party People, I really wanted to work with Steve again, and we spent quite a lot of time talking about what we could do and couldn't really think of anything to do. So in the end, in desperation, we decided we'd go back to Tristram Shandy and do Tristram Shandy. And when we started, we kind of thought it might all be an adaptation of the book. And then I kind of felt that, actually, because the book is about trying to write the story of the book, that we should make a film which included the idea of trying to make the film of Tristram Shandy. So we then got the kind of modern sections of Steve and Rob in the film. And to be honest, when we started filming, we did about the first week and a half was all period filming. And then we had a rainy day, so we couldn't shoot the scene we're doing. So we just took them into the makeup truck, and they just improvised some sort of modern stuff, which became the opening of the film. And for me, it was always kind of it was much more comfortable experience when they were playing around versions of themselves. Always more not comfortable. It was a more enjoyable experience in a way than when they were in the period film, because the period film was quite a sort of stretch. It was quite hard to kind of find comedy in the period section. Then when they became back to themselves, they were kind of, it was sort of easier to play with. So, so those sort of scenes were the light relief, really, in the filming.
So they were not planned?
No, the shape of the modern, no, it was planned to have the modern story break out, but the bit at the beginning and the end were sort of totally improvised and added on, which were the best bits. And really, that's why we did the trip in the end, because it kind of felt like Steve and Rob were best when they were just playing versions of themselves. They can't act, basically, is the problem.
Okay, any questions? Yes.
Hi. I'm wondering if you, as a filmmaker, feel some kind of responsibility for what kind of stories you choose to tell, or if you don't think about it at all.
Of course, you feel responsible in the sense that I wouldn't want to make. Obviously, almost sort of inherent in the process is you don't make films that you don't want to make. I mean, the only motivation for me making a film is that I'm interested in the story and I want to tell it. I don't think films should necessarily be moral, though. I mean, I think there's a big step from that to sort of saying it's the duty of films to teach people something. It's the duty of films to make people behave in a certain way or make people think in a certain way. I think it's very problematic that once you start saying, well, that is, you're dealing with people who do bad things, therefore you shouldn't make a film about them and so on. I think that area becomes quite quickly quite reductive. So I think filmmakers should be free to make what they want to make. It's like and then obviously audiences are free to watch what they want to watch, and so I make the films that I want to make. But and obviously I wouldn't necessarily agree with the choices that other filmmakers make. But I think if you start saying, well, you shouldn't be allowed to make films if they deal with subjects that are difficult in whatever way that is, then or don't teach you a moral, don't teach you a lesson, then I think that's wrong.
I just want to move back to the comedy because I think there's nothing as fantastic as a great comedy, and I think The Trip is hilariously funny, but I know, or I can imagine, it's very hard to get to that, to capture that, or is it easy?
I mean, I think for me, like working with comedians has been really enjoyable. So the first time really was on 24-Hour Party People, and besides Steve, obviously who was the main character, there were a lot of other British people who came from a comedy background, people like Simon Pegg and Peter Kay. Rob had a small part. I think what a lot of those people share in Britain anyway is that they started off developing their own material and writing their own material, developing their own characters. so that when you're on set, they're always thinking about ways in which they can do something which they feel is true to the character they're playing, but also makes it interesting. And comedians are quite competitive. So you have a group of them together. They want to find ways of making what they do kind of like to sort of impress the other comedians and to sort of top what the other guy's doing. So that, from my point of view as a director, that's great, especially if you're working in a way that they can improvise, because instead of it being just what's on the page, they're like constantly trying to find ways of making that richer. And so that was why I really enjoyed doing 24-hour Party People, and why I then wanted to work on the other things. I mean, weirdly, with Steve and Rob, I think Steve and Rob are really funny together. And after doing Tristram Shandy, it was like, I kind of thought it'd be good to work with them again, and we met a few times and had lunch and that, and they're very funny. But we couldn't really think of an idea, so when I suggested that we do the trip, they were actually very resistant. They don't particularly like the idea of working together. And I think at one point they said in the trip, I don't want to be part of a double act. They are very conscious. They don't want to think. They don't want people to think they're some sort of comedy team sort of playing off each other. They prefer to the idea that they're the funny one and the only one that's funny.
So, is it true that the trip is largely improvised? You didn't have a script at all?
Yeah, what happened was I wrote about 60 pages of an outline. So there's an outline of like we did research like where to go, and then obviously I knew them quite well, so we could do a sort of rough outline anyway. Then we did a little rehearsal trip. So there was about 60 pages, which kind of gave you a sense of roughly what the situation was. The idea that Steve was going to take his girlfriend on the trip, and then she left him, and so his ambitions to go to America, his restlessness in home, Rob's kind of situation in life, and so it was that kind of and areas that we talked about before, or they talked about on the rehearsal, which areas to go into, which might be interesting. But the actual filming was totally improvised. And basically, even when you stop filming, they carry on in the same way. So it was like you couldn't really tell where the filming stopped and real life began.
And just when you work with people like that who are able to give very much, to add very much, how do you, as a director, keep them in a good mood?
Food and drink. Well, actually, that's not true. They both not interested in food at all. In fact, they spent a lot of time pushing the food around the plate, and I had to try and force them to eat it.
Okay, there's a question.
Looking at back on your films today, if you even have time to do that, could you point out the most important lessons that you've learned, or any particular favorites or non-favorites among your films? But most importantly, I think the lessons that you learned from all these very, very different films.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not about favourites, not favourites, because you don't really watch them again when you finish them. But also, obviously, you have like memories of the experience of making them, and some experiences are better than others in terms of making them. I mean, I think what I try and do is not like a lesson that like is a good lesson or a bad lesson. What I try and do is make the process of filming as simple as possible. So where possible, kind of work with a small crew and work on low budget, work with the same people. So it's like a kind of everyone before you start, and and so that the fun is and the interest and excitement is in what's happening in front of the camera, not in the whole production process. I think the bigger the production process, the more time and effort is spent on crewing up and on the size of the crew and where to park the vehicles and where to eat your meals and all that kind of logistics, which can become a huge part of filmmaking. All that I kind of find is a real drag on your kind of energy for what you actually really want to do, which is concentrate on what's in front of the camera. So that as a kind of approach has become more like that. But I mean, the truth is that in the end, if you're interested in a story, even if you know it's going to be difficult to do in that way, you end up doing it. So at the moment, we're about to start a film which is set in Soho in London. So I normally film abroad because filming in London is incredibly frustrating and difficult. But this is set in Soho in London. It's set from 1958 to 1992, so it's kind of period in the centre of London. So there are all sorts of problems connected with that, and sort of there are times, especially at the moment we're in pre-production, where it's been like, why are we doing this? Because I hate period films, I hate doing period films, I hate the whole process of this. But the trouble is that you sort of start, you think, okay, this story is interesting, and so because you get involved in that and you want to make that story, you end up kind of getting to the point where you actually are making it. And it's only when you start making it you realise that probably would have been good to think of a contemporary story which had the same kind of interest, really.
There must be one thing you will never do again. There must be one thing you will never do again.
Yeah, lots of things I'll never do again. But, I mean, and also lots of films. Because once you finish a film, as well, in a sense, once you finish any film, it's like, thank God that's over. You know, there's always a sense of relief when you finish any film. But yeah, I wouldn't do an archive documentary again. That's for sure. You have some experiences which are bad, you know, which are just bad experiences and that put you off. But you know, they're not like lessons you can apply, because then the next time you do it might be a good experience. You know, what's great about films, I think, is that each one is very specific. You know, it's like you could take the same script or the same idea, but every time you made it, it would be a very different film and a very different experience. You know, it's all about the people you're working with, the place you're shooting, the weather you have when you're filming it. The whole thing is very dependent on contingent things which you're not in control of, and which actually is the fun of it. For me, the most enjoyable experience is where you have a basic idea when you start, and then gradually through filming it, you kind of work out what it is you want to film and what the story should be, and you're working with a group of people you like, and it's a collaboration, and gradually the thing develops. You know, those are the good experiences, I think.
Speaking about people you work with a Swedish guy called Joakim Sundström on sound a lot, right? And your photographer, he's from Denmark, is he? Or can you say something about the collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, well, with Marcel, Marcel Ziskin's a cameraman I've used on about 10 films, and I mean, really, that was because on 24 Hour Party People, he was Robbie Muller's assistant. Because he had just been working with Robbie on one of Lars von Trier's films, I'm not quite sure which one. So Robbie brought him over from Copenhagen to work with us in Manchester. And then the next film we did was In This World, and it was like a small film. We were going to be travelling for quite a long time in quite difficult places. And I'd like Marcel on the previous film, so I asked him if he wanted to shoot it. So really started from that, and then from that he shot a lot of films after that. With Joakim, I mean, Joakim works in London, so it was by chance we worked with Joakim. And again, it's, you know, in general, you know, if you work with someone you like them in the crew, then you want to work with them again. It's much easier to work with the same crew, same people. It's harder with actors. Even if you work with an actor and you really like them and you want to work with them again, it's still surprisingly hard. There's loads of actors I've worked with once who I'd love to work with again, but you have to have exactly the right part. You know, so it's very hard to kind of repeat that kind of process. But whereas with crew, and especially in production and so on, it's easier to have a kind of relationship which carries on. So with Joakim, you know, then, you know, two of the films we've actually dubbed here as well, because Joakim's kind of brought us to Sweden to dub. Yeah,
you work together with Film i Väst, and yeah, can you say something about that? The meaning, I mean, yeah, since we are in Film i Väst land.
Yeah, it's a very good experience. Very good experience working at Film i Väst. Trollhättan is my favourite place in the world. It's a very exciting city. No, it is a good experience. Yeah, I mean, I say, we did two films, Come Inside Me, and Trishna here, and it is both have been very good experiences. I mean, in a way, it's not been that different from working in London because because the sound post-production, Joakim and another colleague were both from Sweden anyway. So in a way, it was the same sound editing team, but just coming in to mix it. But the mixing experiences were great here, very good.
Okay. So
Anna Kroneman, I think, is here as well. Who's a co-producer. It was a very good co-producer, excellent co-producer.
All right, you mentioned Trishna, so let's watch the clip from Trishna and talk about that a bit. Yeah.
It normally sounds better than that, actually. I haven't just been talking about the dubbing, but I don't know why, it was sounding a bit weird there. But anyway, it normally sounds better than that.
Yeah, maybe it's the DVD. Could you first say something about Trishna? It's a film. It's an adaptation of a quite tragic love story, Tess D'Urberville by Thomas Hardy.
Yeah, it's a Thomas Hardy novel. So it was originally set in 19th century England, a time when sort of rural communities there were being transformed by the coming of the railways and urbanisation, mechanisation of farming, and changes of education and so on. So it was a kind of time of radical social change, and it's about how Tess, who comes from a rural community, is like affected by that change. So I was in India about 8 or 9 years ago doing a film called Code 46. We just did a few days in India. And I was in Rajasthan, and it seemed to me then that the kind of changes that were happening to kind of the rural communities in Rajasthan were very similar to the changes that Hardy was describing. So it'd be interesting to try and transpose the story of Tess to modern day India. So that's how the idea came about.
Mm. And it was interesting to show this clip because you work you work with the Bollywood tradition in a way here.
Yeah, we worked with a composer called Aveny Production, who's a really great young Bollywood composer. So he was writing songs before we started, sort of based on the script for the film, and then one or two were actually recorded like in the film, or like that one, and then a couple were sort of added on. So it was really great to work with someone who's writing some of the music before you start, and also telling the story in the lyrics as well. So that I personally don't really like films where people sit down and express their emotions and express their feelings to other people, especially in a story like this where Trishna is supposed to be quite a passive, kind of back foot person who's a bit of an enigma, and Jay falls in love with her but never really understands her. So it's important that she didn't really ever say what was going on inside her head. And so in a way the music was one kind of way of expressing some of the story of the film and the emotion of the film.
Yeah, question.
You work a lot with different languages in your film. And how would you compare the approach to, for example, working with Steve Coogan on The Trip? That you know from previous films you speak the same language, you know what you're both sort of capable of. How would you compare the approach to working with Steve on something like that to working with foreign actors in a different language on a smaller production?
Yeah, well, obviously it's very different. And to be honest, it's rare that I work with... it's not true, but on the whole, when I'm working, if there's elements of a film which are in a foreign language, it's normally not working with actors, but kind of working with non-professional actors. And so, like in the case of Trishna, the main dialogue is in English because Jay is British. He's from Britain. He goes over to India because his dad owns hotels in India, and he goes over to kind of get some work experience in the hotel. So he's British and he only speaks English. So the whole story with Frida is really in English, and equally, in the world in Mumbai where they live, he's a rich kind of kid in Mumbai, and that world is an English-speaking world. So the world in the bits of Trishna which are in either Hindi or Marwari, the local language, are really the family. And so, in the case of Trishna, her dad is supposed to be a driver. In Tess, he's a driver of a horse and cart. So we were looking for drivers, and we decided in the end he should be a sort of Jeep driver. He's a guy who's borrowed some money and bought a Jeep and drives a Jeep for kind of local farms and that, and his brother's a farmer. So that world, we went around to Ossia in the town we were filming in. We met lots of people and went through the schools and met lots of farmers and so on. And we found a family where the dad was a Jeep driver. So the family and the house they live in, the business they have, that is all the kind of situation where they're all playing themselves. And so we inserted Frida into that kind of real situation. So the sections of the film that are in foreign language is really like where Frida's responding to what they're doing, and it's not that they're having to act out a certain character or act out a particular dialogue. It wasn't like you have to say this and this is what you have to do. It was like Frida would introduce kind of certain ideas, and then they would respond to that in the way they wanted to respond. And so from my point of view, but also from Frida's point of view, is how she learned how to behave, was spending time with them and kind of watch, and being inserted into a real family rather than it being a bunch of actors who are trying to recreate a story. And I think in general that's true, that I have worked abroad a lot, but in general I think the main characters tend to be either from Britain or have some angle that makes it possible, and then the rest of it is kind of is trying to insert them into kind of real situations. So things like Welcome to Sarajevo, the main character is the English journalist who's there and covering the war. I think you have to have that kind of starting point normally. I mean, the exception is in this world because it's about 2 refugees, but that's why we had no kind of input into what they said or did. We just organised a trip and then let them respond to that, so we weren't having to try and tell people how to behave.
I was just wondering.
The microphone, please.
I'm over here. Thanks a lot. I was wondering, you were talking about using people who are actually just portraying themselves and situations in their lives that may have been very painful. People are quite vulnerable if they don't, they're not professional actors as such. How do you handle working with that? Are there any pitfalls, or do you have to have a therapeutic sense as well?
Yeah, I guess obviously I'm trying to think what particular situations that would be parallel to that. I think this wasn't really about that in terms of dealing with difficult emotional situations, but maybe it was to a certain extent. I think the most extreme case of that was in this world, because we had to pick people who were genuine refugees and and bring them on a trip, you know, with a bunch of strangers, you know, a long way to a different country. And then the deal was that they wanted to go back. You know, it's like we weren't offering to be their routes to a different life. We were offering to give them an experience which we thought, we were looking for people we thought might enjoy that experience, would be strong enough to survive that experience and find it a positive experience, not a negative one. And people who wanted to go back, you know, both Jamal and Ayatollah had families in Peshawar, you know, and they've been, I think Jamal was born in Peshawar, and Ayatollah kind of moved from Afghanistan as a kid with his family. But, you know, like a lot of refugees, there's a lot of second generation refugees. And so you know, it is a difficult choice. Like, you know, are they going to find a, you know, very different culture and so on? And one of the reasons we picked Jamal was he had very good English, so that we kind of felt he would be you know, comfortable because he was able to understand what we were doing, and then also he would be able to translate for Ayatollah, because one of our rules was, you know, they had to both speak English. But when we met Ayatollah, he spoke no English at all, but we liked him a lot, and he was really keen to do it, and we thought he was a good person for it. So that was hard, you know, and then it was very difficult to get their paperwork and quite stressful to get their paperwork, not only about getting them out of Pakistan, which was difficult, but also about getting them back into Pakistan, because as refugees, they have no particular right. It's not as though they have an obvious right to go back to Pakistan either. So there's a lot of stress in that area. You know, it's difficult. Jamal's dad had died, so his mum was, you know, so it was dealing with the extended family about permissions and so on.
So you're taking a very real risk.
Yes, I mean, it's like, obviously it depends. Yeah, I mean, obviously we felt sure we could get him to England back. But it's a question of, like, would he enjoy that experience? And then weirdly, what happened was, you know, we did all that and we took them back. You know, and then about 3 months later, Jamal turned up back in Britain and had actually come back by himself and applied for refugee status, and now lives in Britain. So that, you know, obviously, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. You know, it's like, it was like not our intention.
That was a turning point for him, you would say.
Yeah, I think. I mean, it's hard to know. Obviously, talked about it a lot with him, but I mean, at the time, for the first 2 years, he was underage. He was like 16, so he was. And to be honest, his age changed depending on who he was talking to. His age changed quite a lot at different times. But so when he arrived, actually, he didn't want people to know he'd been on the film at all. So the first year or two, he was not wanting the authorities to know that he'd been in the film at all, because he thought that his solicitor thought that would prejudice his case as a refugee. So it was quite a difficult situation. So, but in the end, anyway, he now has the right to stay in Britain, and he is in Britain. But whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. Obviously, it was his choice, and I think probably what happened was, from talking to him, that when he got back, because we had got the kind of visa to get him partway, what came to Britain, that I think there were various bits of the visa he thought he could use and get out, and that if it expired, once those expired, he wouldn't be able to get out. And that was a choice, and obviously that's difficult. From our point of view, it's difficult. You know, we felt very responsible for him, but you know, in the end, you know, you can't say to someone, "You've made the wrong choice. I'm going to take you back." You know, that is his choice.
Yes, another question.
Do I need to press anything? Is that okay? In here. Trishna is your third adaptation, I think, of Thomas Hardy novel, Jude, The Claim, and now Trishna. He's a pretty bleak novelist, and the two earlier films, I haven't seen Trishna, I'm going to see it tomorrow, were also pretty bleak. Jude, one of the bleakest movies I think I've ever seen.
I take that as a compliment.
What draws you to Thomas Hardy in particular?
I started reading him as a teenager and really loved him. You know, and so actually what happened was I did a TV for 1-hour films for TV, which we cut into a film length thing, a bit in the same way as The Trip. When a long time ago, it was called Family. It was written by Roddy Doyle. And we took it to Toronto Film Festival and showed it there. And after screening it there, someone said that they'd pay for a script of anything. What do you want to have a script of? And also, off the top of my head, I said Jude, you know, because it's one of my favourite books. And I think Hardy isn't as bleak as people think he is. I think, you know, that Hardy does write about people who have tragic lives, but he writes about the fact that comes from the way in which society impacts on them, and actually is much more radical writer than people give him credit for. And, you know, in the case of Jude, you know, what Jude says is like, I might not get. Jude is a story about someone who wants to go to university basically and can't, and you know, he says, like, I might not be able to get there, but my children or my children's children might be able to get there. So for me, I read that, you know, when I was a teenager, and you know, and I was like the first generation of my family that had gone to university. So it seemed to me that Hardy was saying, this society is wrong for excluding people like Jude from education and so on. And he's talking, as I said before, he's talking about a society where things are changing. Like generation before, Jude wouldn't have had any aspiration to go to university, but with more education, with urbanization and so on, that it offers up the possibility of social mobility. But he'd been excluded. But I think Hardy not only was saying that was wrong, but that it will change, that things will get better. That progress does happen. People like Jude kind of may fail themselves, but they create opportunities for other people, and I think that's quite a positive message. And in the case of education, was true. 2 generations later, lots of people are going to university who had been traditionally excluded. So I don't really agree that. I think he writes of tragedies, obviously, but I don't agree that he's bleak, or certainly maybe bleak, but I don't agree that he's pessimistic. I think he has a kind of perspective which is, these are man-made institutions. In Tess, he criticises the church a lot for its attitude to women and children outside marriage and so on. And he's saying these are man-made institutions, not God-given, and we can change them and we can make them better.
Thank you.
And I think it's interesting when you talk about the script. You're involved sometimes and sometimes not in writing, right?
Well, you're always involved, I think, as a director. Most of the films done, I think, probably started as an idea that I've had. And then, of course, you work with writers just like you work with actors and cameramen and so on. But you're always involved. And so, the credit is often a little bit... it's a collaboration. Film should be a collaboration. And exactly how that works varies from film to film. But I think, it's I think as a director, you have to... It varies, obviously, but as I say, most times it's like, okay, this would be an interesting idea, and then we talk to the writer and we talk about the idea and we try and work on the idea together, and then they may go off and write it. But at the end of it, when you start filming, you have to take responsibility for all of it. So obviously you're involved in all the stages, that process with the writer and then with the actors.
Okay, and is everything as much fun for you?
I think I used to hate the actual filming a bit, especially when at the beginning, we had more traditional kind of size crews, quite big crews, and no one knew each other, and you've got 6 weeks, and you've got to do quite a lot each day, and there's quite a lot of pressure, and no one knows who you are, and you don't know who they are, and that sort of situation can be quite stressful. But now we try and work with smaller crews, and usually it's people we know, so that makes it more relaxed. So these days, we try and, let's say sometimes we try and do films over a long period of time, so you're doing a little bit of filming every now and then, rather than all in one block. So 9 Songs was like that, and we're just finishing a film, just editing a film called Here and There, which we spent 5 years making. So we've done maybe 2 or 3 weeks a year for five years. So that kind of blurs the distinction between pre-production and production and post-production. So you're working on the story at the same time as you're filming it, at the same time as you're editing it, and that kind of makes the whole process more enjoyable.
Okay. Do we have some more questions? And no, it's not 5 o'clock yet.
We can stop. I'm sure we can stop.
And yeah.
Thank you. Who would you say has influenced you as a filmmaker? What films did you like when you were a kid and a teenager?
I guess when I started kind of going out, especially to try and watch films, I come from a small town, but there was a little film club in the small town, so they were showing a lot of new German cinema. So those kind of films seemed appealing. All the kind of classic kind of post-war European cinema, really, French New Wave, that sort of thing. And then when I started work, I had a chance to be an assistant to Lindsay Anderson for about 6 months, who was a filmmaker I admired. And then the first job I got as a director was doing a couple of documentaries on Ingmar Bergman. So I got a chance to meet him and the people who work with him. So in different ways, I think it's like it's a sort of transition from watching films and liking films, but them being very distant. You don't have any connection with them. So I didn't know anyone who worked in cinema at all, and you watch them in a different way. And then the sort of next stage, I guess, you start to meet people who make films, and that makes it seem more kind of more. You start to connect the process of how of actually how something gets made. You think about the process in a slightly different way when you see the people making it and talk to them. But
and there.
In many of your films, from In This World to The Trip, I have the sense that you have a documentary kind of approach, which also gives an objective sense to the way you are directing. Is this done for a particular reason, for aesthetic reason, or some other?
I think in general I quite like films which are quite open, where you don't feel everything is organised in order to have like this moment, be the moment when everyone feels this, and this moment is the moment where everyone feels that. And I think connected with that, is I like improvisation. I like allowing kind of freedom to the actors or the people in the film to do what they want to do, and that we watch them. And those two things go together. I think obviously if you want to have a very precise end product, you have to shoot in a very precise way, and you have to know this is what the camera movement is, and this is where the line is, and this is where the emotion's going to come, and the music's going to swell. So I think the way you work and the end product obviously are interconnected. And for me, I like working in quite a loose way, and I like films that leave quite a lot of space when you're watching it for you to have time to think about it as well as be sort of emotionally engaged in it. So in a sense, there's I guess that's the reason. It's partly I enjoy working that way, and partly that's kind of the end result is sort of in the area I quite like. And and it may just be I'm lazy. I can't be bothered with all the effort you have to put into to kind of create the kind of specific moments. But I prefer that idea that you're not quite sure what's going to happen, and you're not quite sure what you think about it when it has happened.
Well, we are approaching the end of this hour. I'm going to allow myself to ask the last question. When listening to you and also looking at all that you've done, you make it sound, like it's no problem, making 3 films at the same time, and But I know from experience talking to other filmmakers that it can be a real struggle, and I just wonder, where do you find the energy and the power to overcome all the big and small, troubles that comes in your way?
I think the first thing is you have to have films you want to make. It's like, so right at the beginning when we started making films, I set up a company with Andrew Eaton, who's a friend and also a producer. So we've worked as partners over a long period of time, and therefore because that means that because we have a small companies, when we have an idea, we develop that idea and try and see if we can get that to the stage where it's ready to make us a film. So because of that, there's always 2 or 3 ideas we have that we think would be good films, and then the issue is about how to get the money to make them. And for me, it's like much more enjoyable. The process of working on a film, working with the crew, working with the actors, working with the production people and the writer and so on, going and looking at locations, all that's fun, all that side is enjoyable. What isn't enjoyable is going around and waiting, especially just waiting when you send somebody off to a financier and then you wait to find out whether you've got the money. So obviously, if it's more fun to be making a film than not, then the best thing, the aim is to try and always be making a film. So our plan has been, if you're always making a film, it's going to be more enjoyable than if you're sitting around at home waiting. It's not like the sitting around at home waiting is the good bit, and then it's horrible when you make it. It's the other way around. It's the sitting around at home waiting that's the really depressing bit.
Okay, yeah. Great to hear, and thanks a lot for coming and accepting the Honorary Dragon Award. Thanks, Michael Winterbottom.
Thanks.